welcome to our panel discussion. Welcome to our panelists. We're going to introduce ourselves in a minute. And we've got an incredible crowd here. Really looking forward to this. I've been excited about this for quite a long time. I just want to start with a few words, just so that we all understand why we're talking about the future of filmmaking. And we particularly want to connect people who are just out there doing their jobs, making a living, with the future. And it's not a pathway that's always obvious. So we want to help with that. But first of all, to give you a flavor of why we are so excited about this, I just want to say that I'm old enough that when I went to school and I was learning maths as we call it in the UK, I was given a tool called a slide rule.
A slide rule.
A slide rule. Google it, because I'm sure most of you are young enough never to have seen it. And with this slide rule, we did calculations, and this is actually how aircraft were designed. You know, the early space program happened, people using slide rules. And the slide rule was invented by a mathematician called Pascal 345 years ago. And the only thing that changed in that period of 345 years was that slide rules were made of plastic instead of wood. That was the only advance. In 1974, when I was at school using the slide rule, my dad, who'd been working as a material scientist with NASA, was given the very first scientific calculator made by Hewlett-Packard. It was called the HP35, and this thing fit in your shirt pocket, had, let's say, 10,000 transistors in it, and everybody wondered how the hell you could fit 10,000 transistors in that. And that was incredible. I took it into school, and it was as if I'd taken an alien artifact. That blew my mind, and that started me on this path of being a technology geek. Today, if you buy the latest iPhone, it has approximately 18,000 million transistors in it. Yeah, count them. And just another quick statistic, which is that the current iPhone arguably is 1,000 times faster than the first iPhone only 12 years ago. So, folks, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a 1,000-fold increase in capability in just over 10 years. And guess what? It's not slowing down. So, moving back to our own area of expertise and endeavor, exactly the same thing has happened in filmmaking. We've moved from using that thing we used to call film to making incredibly high resolution, high dynamic range material with these tools that we still call cameras, but it's almost like we're immunized to this rate of change. So we want to explore how you work as a filmmaker with all of this change going on. Okay, look, we're going to first of all introduce our guests, or in fact, rather than even get our guests to introduce themselves, they're going to introduce our other guests, just to be a bit quirky. So, Michael, would you like to kick off?
Yes, this was my terrible idea.
I'm going to blame you for this.
That's fine. That's fine. But it's much easier to talk about somebody else, I feel, than yourself. You always want someone to talk about you.
Yeah.
And since we didn't assign you someone, I just wanted to say, this is Dave, and he's doing a great job, because what him and his team does is you actually said, these were your words, RedShark brings excitement to technology. And that's important, because it should be exciting, and we need to get excited about it, and I think you guys do an excellent job of providing the excitement for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Sandra. So Sandra Valde Hansen is someone you guys should all be paying attention to, not only because she's been written up in magazines like ICG as DPs to watch, but Sandra's one of these people that you can identify with, in that she's already done every position on the set. And I find people that are really talented are able to understand the process of every single person on the set. You realize in broadcast, if you're a director in live broadcast, you have to have done every single job in the control room. The reason is if someone in the control room dies, because it's live, you as the director can jump in and do that job, right? In movies, that's not how we do it. So there are people in positions that have never done any other position. Sandra is not one of these people. She does that, and that makes her a Swiss Army knife on the set. And she also is into documentary and fiction. And so when she mixes that, and a lot of you can understand the relationship between documentary and fiction and that together. And also, for anyone considering AFI, this is also one of your AFI instructors. And so she's really, really exceptional as an instructor. So when she's not shooting, she's helping other people get better at their craft. And the last thing I could say about her is you should all Google Sandra Valde Hansen and Camera Image. Camera Image is a film festival in November. She did an awesome presentation in November, and you should all watch it. That's your homework assignment. Okay, so that's Sandra.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Michael.
So I've been given the task to introduce Michael Cioni, who's the Senior Vice President of Innovation over at Panavision and former president of Light Iron, which is currently a Panavision company. And beyond that, he is the...
currently?
Well, in the past, it wasn't a Panavision company. Present day...
I was kidding.
Yeah. It will be around forever. He's also the tip of the spear behind the DXL project. He's been really even more important than all of that. He's someone that, in an admirable way, hasn't been scared of new technology. In fact, he's been pretty much on the forefront of embracing it, adopting it, integrating it, and helping keep Light Iron and Panavision on the bleeding edge of motion picture production, which I think is awesome.
Thank you, Phil.
There you go.
Thank you.
So I'm going to introduce all of you to Dan Duran, who is the post-technology specialist over at RED. Imaging specialist at RED. I knew I wasn't going to. But to me, and as you said, and I wholeheartedly agree, he is the post-guru at RED. And I just did a show. It's actually my first RED project in a while, and Dan he broke it down for me. And if there's anything you want to know about what is behind any sort of workflow at RED, it's this guy. Because when I went in, I was planning on using the IPP2 workflow, but reading a little bit about it, I found it a little bit daunting and just a little bit much. And I was introduced to him, and I remember that day, and he brought out his laptop. I was in the middle of testing, and he showed me a couple of things on his laptop, and I'm like, that's it? That's it? And from then forward, everything made sense to me. So if you want to understand anything behind the RED cameras, the Monstro in particular, which I think is a fantastic camera, talk to Mr. Dan Duran here from RED.
Awesome.
So, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. My job is to introduce Phil Holland here. I've known for a very long time. He is a cinematographer, but he's also a man of many hats. I've known him to do pretty much everything out there. My favorite thing about Phil is he really, truly embraces technology. What he does, he realizes that the more he learns, the more valuable he is, and the more important he is to me and to everyone else out there. I can reach out to Phil because he has his hands in everything, and there's always something he can teach me about or go over about or even help me test, and I love that about Phil. Also, he gives me awesome footage all the time for a lot of demos. My favorite is I have footage over there. It's playing on the AK Sharp, and it's of New York, and everyone's like, why does that footage look so familiar? Well, it was because it's used for the Apple wallpapers. And
that one's from the 12K shoot.
Oh, the 12, yeah. So that's where he took multiple cameras and stitched them all together, not just AK, but multiple AKs to create an amazing looking image. So he really embraces technology and finds ways to implement it into his vision, which is awesome.
I just want to say something else about Phil, which is that he's probably sold more 8K televisions than anyone on the planet.
Yeah.
I currently have footage on almost every 8K television manufacturer's TV.
Yeah.
There's only 2 companies I haven't hit yet, so.
Yeah, he's been mastering in 8K since the beginning, which is amazing.
Thank you. So here's a question. If filmmaking is all about light, what's actually changed with the new technology? We're still capturing light. We still carefully illuminate scenes with light. So what's actually changed? What's it like shooting at the cutting edge of film and video technology now, bearing in mind that we're still shooting the old analog world out there? Sandra, do you like to start with that?
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to, the art form has not changed.
Nope.
Absolutely not. As far as us creating an image, that still exists. It's all about story. However, it's the tools that put out the light that are changing, and it's actually the tools that are capturing the light that are changing. And for better and for worse. Obviously what I'm talking about is LED technology.
Yeah.
And the LED technology has come a long way. It has made particularly the things that I do, which are indie features and television, it has allowed me to be fast, which is the one thing that I think every production now wants. Is you not only have to be good, but you also have to be fast and deliver more. But now with the art of LED technology, you have the ability to change things literally at the click of your fingertips. The only thing, I want to go into what's capturing the light. Obviously, we all know there are so many amazing cameras out there, and the sensors are absolutely extremely sensitive that sometimes we don't even need to actually put light there. We could already capture what our eye sees. So it's our job as a cinematographer to kind of create an art behind that. The only thing I do have to say in terms of LED technology is, and this works hand in hand with cameras, is they're not totally there in terms of color rendition. Obviously, it's very good in terms of white light, but on my show that I did, it's extremely colorful, and I found that creating narrow spectrum colors with LEDs are extremely difficult. And I'm not saying it's not a problem, it's just a hump that we have to overcome, and how we do that is via testing or via the old school of gels. But that's where I see the change with light.
Yeah, and it's a minefield out there with that technology at the moment.
So I just want to move on to the question of workflow. This evening here is all about workflow. Dan, you're the workflow specialist at Red Cameras, and I guess when there was film, there wasn't really a workflow in the same sense, was there?
Yeah, it's different now. With digital workflows, you're able to see your images right away. Just plug in the computer, playback files, full res. Back then, you would have to capture and hope and take a look at your wet lab and what you got back in terms of, did I capture? Was there anything in the gate? Were there any issues? Where now you can visually see your footage instantly, and you're able to start editing right away if you want to. So it has changed. It's sped up the process, which is great. And time is very important when working with any type of post pipeline.
Yeah. Phil, what are the changes that you've seen over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is Michael and I have been in the industry for around the same time,
yes.
The better part of two decades or slightly over. And my primary world was a motion picture film world. And the best I can say to that now is it's very clear that the primary capture medium is digital industry-wide. And at the same time, the industry has become incredibly bigger, much more dynamic, streaming, different deadlines, even the ecosystem of what a film set operates like typically versus a digital set in terms of how we're filming. Sometimes we're rolling for an hour or two before we have to swap a digital mag. On the Super 35 world, you're done in 8 to 10 minutes, and then you're swapping mags. That changed the ecosystem quite a bit in terms of the actual production day. From the world I'm from, with the post-visual effects and color, we were actually, the guy who hired me in the industry in the late 90s invented the 4K film scanner in the mid-90s, so I was fortunate enough to be very ahead of the curve in that way. So that stuff didn't really scare me, but the introduction of DI digital coloring, all happened in this time frame. Some of these terms didn't even exist then. And as Dan was saying, we have the ability to see what we're doing much more precisely while we're doing it. I have consulted with many clients very recently who are doing straight-to-air delivery even. So they're doing productions that basically are pushed out immediately after wrap, being edited in real time virtually. And that's not even live broadcast. That's like basically integrated media. So
we're going to come on to the future technology in a minute. But Michael, I was just going to say, over the last 10, 15 years, what has changed most and what has stayed the same most?
The question from David was, what has changed and what has stayed the same? I'm actually a little disappointed by what stayed the same. Because if you think about it, most of the behaviors that are affiliated with the filmmaking process have simply been digitized, but the behaviors themselves are, for the most part, identical. We tend to show up the same amount of hours. We tend to shoot about the same amount of footage. We tend to take about the same amount of time to get that footage to an editor. We still run camera over here and sound over there. And we simply digitize the process, but we haven't changed everything. I think the people that have done the most amount of change are the people who are more affiliated with doing it themselves. The do-it-yourselfer, their game has changed the most because the tools have enabled them to elevate their quality and their resources. And since we're at the Creative Suite, Vitek has more things integrated together. That's where the change is, but those are for a lot of the do-it-yourselfers. The people who do it in the more traditional professional world don't do it dramatically differently than when we showed up here. I'm not disappointed by that because somebody screwed up or somebody's got a bad attitude. It's just the nature of what a digital technology has brought. It's changed the format, not the behavior, but that is going to change because as we've gone through the last, let's call it 20 years, because the F900 kind of came out in 99, so let's call it an even round 20 years. I would say 5 years from now, the behavior is going to have a major tipping point, and we're going to see a massive change in behavior on all sectors, all SKUs of the process. And honestly, do-it-yourselfers are the best poised to receive that because you're already trained on how to do this stuff. And a friend of mine, Brad Olson, posted a post the other day, and he said, he was talking about post-production workflow, and he had a really good quote. He said, man, I don't want to misquote it, but he basically said, the amount of things that are changing there are groups that are protecting the status quo, and they're the ones that are missing out the most. The people that do it the more pro way are often missing out the most. And he says the person who wants to do it one way, their way, is also the least knowledgeable. And I happen to agree with that.
Yeah, you see manifestations of this all over the place where, we talk about the democratization of technology in the sense that you can now buy cameras, for $6,000 that would have cost $60,000 or $100,000 maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But I just wanted to focus on this process of how do people who are out there making a living at whatever level in the industry, and every level is okay, if you're doing stuff you think is good and your clients think is good. What is the process where people who are not out there shooting the most cutting-edge feature films benefit from this very high-end technology that we talk about all the time? And I think the process is, I'll just give you one example. I'll be interested to see if the rest of you think of examples where, when was it, in 2012 or 13, was it? The F55 camera came out from Sony. Can't remember exactly which year. Was 13. It was a 4K camera, really forward-looking. What happened next is that cameras like the FS7 and the FS5 came out with the same sensor at a much lower price level. And it's the same process as with Formula One cars, where like ceramic brakes, engine management, and so on. We find that in our little saloons that we drive around. I just wondered if you guys can think of any examples of that, because it's really important to connect what's going on in this very high elite sort of end with what people are doing, making their everyday livings.
Yeah, I think it really levels the playing field. Like 12 years ago, or whatever day you said, I couldn't imagine owning my own, high-end quality camera. But now that is a possibility,
yeah.
And true talent really sticks out because, you now have the flexibility having the same quality as everyone else. Where true talent sticks out opposed to big budgets.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, right now what I think is really interesting is, especially in the last 10 years, particularly 10 years, maybe 11, we've seen cameras get a lot better, a lot cheaper, and do a lot more, which is really interesting. And how this even circulates to the Red ecosystem is all of the current cameras actually are virtually the same brain, and what you're paying for is a different sensor, in terms of the F55 example there. So, that's what is happening. And for me, what's really touching about that is we're getting into a time with digital where we have multiple formats. We have access to multiple formats. And that's really what's empowering for filmmakers is right now at a variety of tiers, price points, whatever you want to call them, there's ways for you to shoot with a fairly modest budget. And if you're at that stage in your career where you feel it's appropriate to step up to a bigger and better tool for that job.
Yes.
And that's the ecosystem right now. We have access to crazy tools right now, not just on the camera side. There's more lenses than ever. It's insane. We have accessories across the board that makes our life much easier. So.
But one of the things that I do, I am an educator, and one of the things that we do teach at the AFI as cinematographers is we are kind of the keepers of the image. And before, it was sometimes a little bit difficult because once you kind of sent your film off to somewhere, it was in somebody else's hands. Now, I do this now. Actually, it's actually built into my contract now, but I get a hard drive of all the footage that I shoot every night. And I go home with my little hard drive that now you could hold 4 terabytes of footage. It doesn't matter. I get Resolve on my laptop for free. I have a small HD monitor, and I'm going through all the footage. I could color it myself if I want to. I can analyze the footage myself. I honestly can do it all. Obviously, there are many people that can do it better than me, but just having access to this, I truly, as a cinematographer, can be kind of the gatekeeper of the image with this technology. So.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'd just like to focus on this idea of what should people be doing to connect themselves with the future. And I just want to, before we start talking about that, from my point of view, the real answer to that is they don't need to do anything. They just have to wait for it to come to them. If they want to just carry on with what they're doing in their day-to-day lives, as you said it yourself, you're on your laptop, you're doing stuff that would have required a supercomputer or at least a very expensive workstation a few years ago. So what do you guys think? Is that the way to approach the future? Wait for it to come to us, or should we be actively engaging with it?
I have an interesting POV on this because I used to work for a $100 million studio. When I went out on my own to become a full-time cinematographer, a few things were very apparent to me where I needed a camera that hit a certain bar to facilitate for my clients, but I also needed to make myself competitive against large studios. And what's unique about these times, at least from my unique experience, is the stuff I am able to do right now is leagues beyond what a studio just a few years ago could do with a fairly large investment of equipment. And I have a fairly large investment of equipment, but it's modest in comparison in the scale of things. And at that point, it's interesting as well because that gives you a superpower, because when I have to upgrade a workstation, I have to do 1 or 2. A studio has to do 10 to 400 or more. There's cost value assessments to all of this. And I think what I can do, because I do wear a lot of hats, my first 8K work, I was doing the work in a hotel room around the world from a custom-made laptop. It was all color graded on a calibrated display and all that, but I was traveling, shooting, downloading footage at night, sending off dailies. I was able to facilitate all of this, basically a pipeline and a workflow for essentially the biggest client on earth, and they trusted me with that, which is in itself even strange. But if early on that I couldn't convince them of that, which I did, some tests, some results, and they were like, wow, this is good, it changed their mind on the whole thing. And to Michael's point, by having an open mind, for me, workflow and pipelines are adaptive to every project. Some people need to work certain ways. I am with you on no matter what, getting the footage in, because the biggest difference between digital and film is you're not going to go to a lab and time the lights or anything, but you can actually evaluate what you shot, find things you like, tweak things a little bit. That's what digital really does empower us, especially with cameras that have raw codecs, and that's really powerful stuff. So,
my perspective is that my title again is innovation, right? And so when you think about a product like the iPod, we can all remember the iPod because it's easy to remember because the day before you heard about it, it virtually didn't exist. Yeah. And then when you heard about it, you owned it because it's one of the fastest tipping points that took the CD Discman and overnight made the CD Discman totally dead. It killed a product. It killed an industry in an instant, right? So that's an example where some technologies, you just wait and they'll come. And if they're really, really, really elegant and they fit, it'll just be totally automatic. And everybody agrees ubiquitously the iPod is better than CD players. There's no...
self-evident almost, yes.
Self-evident. So there is that. So certain technologies do come that way. And even if people are really in love with, they have a large CD collection, they're like, you know what, my CD collection, I'm really worried about this because I've invested a lot. I'm still going to go this other direction. So there's always some people that take more time to get onto that. So that is a lot of the technology is, you're correct, waiting for it to come and it will deliver. The reason it will be delivered is because there are a number of people in the community that are committed to being those innovators, to thinking up those new ideas. But the key ingredient to thinking up good ideas is being a part of the community. An engineer, which is vital to the process, is not someone who's going to invent the golden nugget of the process, because only the user is going to know those things, right? And so what we try to do is connect to the user. The company I work for, Panavision, is so committed to user feedback because an engineer is not going to conceptualize some of the behaviors because the engineers don't spend time making the film, right? I use the analogy that cars are built so well because the engineers who design them drive them to work every single day. That is not the case with cameras generally. Engineers who design them don't shoot. Editors who design editing systems don't actually edit feature films, right? And so this is where we have to try to bridge those gaps. We need an engineering world, which is the technical world. We need a creative world. And so I call that being technative. And having a technative mind means that we're leveraging the engineering side of this, but getting the feedback from the users. And that's how we make a great product that ends up becoming like an iPod. And so we're in a harmony together, yeah. And we can't rely on just the manufacturer.
It's that constant feedback.
Yeah,
right?
And you can't just be a crummy, complaining creative all day either, because then you're never going to get what you want. You got to prove with constructive feedback to the manufacturer, or else they're never going to invent what you're saying, because your message is clouded in your bad attitude. Nobody likes a bad attitude, so they just write you off, even if your idea is good. So be polite. And then the engineers have to be open-minded, and together, that's how iPods happen.
I just wanted to say, I think we've been over-ambitious in saying in 35 minutes we're going to talk about the future, because it's kind of a big thing. That's just dawning on me as we run through this. But before we throw it open to a few questions, I just wanted to say, one of the things that makes people fear the future is that they fear that the work they're doing is going to be somehow outdated or superseded by something that's better. Now, I think that's what philosophers call a category mistake. You know, it's nobody says that that oil painting is no longer valid because we have television and we have cameras. And you see what I mean? What do you guys think about this question? What is it that people fear about the future?
Yeah. I think to build off what Cioni was said earlier as well is to embrace really technology and really take advantage of it. I think a big thing is future-proofing, trying to have your vision last as long as possible. And the status quo is always changing, CDs and iPods. Same thing with, video. I had a collection of VHSs that moved to a few, laser discs, that moved to DVDs, to Blu-rays, to the cloud. It's always changing, but the one thing that stayed the same is I had Jurassic Park on all of those. And because I was shot in 35 mil, I was able to take advantage of the status of the current technology of the time. A good example is I Love Lucy. She shot on 35 mil. That's being somewhere played at all times around the world. I don't know any other show in the 1950s that's happening to right now. So really embracing and taking advantage of the current technology, I think, is really important to do.
I like that example, actually, and I think I'm right on the same page. You need to be open-minded, and whenever anything new comes to the market, I look at it with pretty big eyes and ask what sort of potential is there for it. Is it attractive to me? Does it inspire me? Does it spark joy? Does it do that whole thing? The long and the short of it is the industry is moving faster than it's ever moved before. And something that's interesting and relevant to the I Love Lucy reference, because that show became incredibly popular and they did actually what they could to step up the visuals at a time where cinema and television was going through a fascinating revolution. If you start going back and looking at older films, even shot on older film stocks that had too much grain or were even lower resolution, you'll notice there's no wide shots, not wide shots like we know them today. If you look at fast forward into the future, like a show like House of Cards on the season 2 episode opener, premiere episode of season 2, there's an ultra wide, an extra wide establishing shot of a park with people way in the distance. And the concept of people having dialogue on a shot like that and having the shot hold really wasn't possible before 4K came along. So in the sense of telling a story, the new technology can empower you. It could really inspire you to do things like that. And it's actually changed the way we've even started filming our projects. We now have a different structure. That's going to continue. Don't be scared of, don't be waiting for 2 years to make a movie. There's no better time to create than right now. But when it comes to the technology itself, explore it as best you can with an open mind, open heart, and outside of anything, be extremely hungry to learn, because for anyone to stay relevant as a professional in these times, you're gonna have to kind of surf that wave a little bit. Whether that manifests in tutorials, film schools, you name it, it's just very important to pay very close attention to that stuff.
Sandra.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm just gonna kind of piggyback on you.
Piggyback away.
I mean, ultimately, we're all filmmakers. The reason why we got into this industry and do what we do is not because we wanted to be technologists. We wanted to be storytellers. And so ultimately, it comes down to the story, right? So if you have a story to tell, then tell it. And I mean, I am a mom. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she knows how to use a smartphone. And she's already taking videos on her smartphone. And hopefully she can edit them on the smartphone. I mean, and that's where it starts, is when you have a story to tell, take the technology that you know and start from there. And then, as Phil was saying, embrace the technology that exists and learn. Don't be afraid of it, because it can be very intimidating, but use that. If you're looking at a piece of technology, you're like, oh, wait a second, I could use that for that particular scene in my film, or something like that. I mean, again, I keep up reiterating basically what all of you guys are saying. I mean, technology is right here at our fingertips, but we cannot forget that the heart and soul of what we do is storytelling.
Yeah, the art and craft of visual
Yes.
storytelling is timeless.
Yes.
And that's the key point there.
I mean, we can all learn, we could read books, we can learn the technology. It's the story part that's the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah, and back to what I said about Brad Olson's quote, which was, again, that sometimes the people that insist on one way of doing things are the least knowledgeable people. What that really spoke volumes to me when he said that recently, because not only do I think it's true, I think it is a little preview into some of the challenges we're having. My problem with how we're anticipating and managing the future is the same in the film industry as it is in society. It's the exact same problem, because we're all people. And I find it really fascinating that the problems that I have with the film industry are the same problems I see outside the world, because we're the same species, right? And so it makes a lot of sense, right? What that problem is to me, and you can take it as a global issue, or you could take it down to a cinema issue, you could take it down to your family, whatever you want to do. You can boil it down as small as you want. The problem is this concept of binary thought. If I believe A, then it must mean I don't believe B. Humans are far more complicated than that. And the problem is we're letting a binary way of thinking drive this. So it's like, if you believe in high resolution, then you don't care about the story, right? And it's like, that's so binary, that's so convenient and silly, right? And that's not how people are. I can't be defined by a 1 or a 0. As much as I love them, I can't be defined by them. I'm somewhere in the middle, which is where probably you guys all are. So when I try to figure out how the future is going to work, I try to factor in the behavior of people and use that to try to predict the future. And I'm not going to tell you all my secrets, but I'll give you a clue, because what is the next phase of behavior is going to end up being manifested in the stories we tell and the technology with which we tell them. We cannot divorce ourselves from the stories and the technology, because we are behind both of them, right? Technative. So how that's actually going to play out is a new phrase me and my innovation team kind of came up with. And again, this is just a tease. We call it tactile attraction. Tactile attraction is a phenomenon that I'm starting to recognize, because if you were born in the year 2000, maybe 1997 to year 2000, by the time you were 10 years old and you started to have independent thoughts, the iPhone came out. And the problem with that is your entire adult life was spent on a screen. If you were born before the year 1997, and you got your iPhone in 2007, you've spent the last 12 years on a screen. What's happening right now is a behavioral change, which I call tactile attraction. Why is film having a resurgence? Why does vinyl have a resurgence? Why are cassette tapes? Why does analog? Why does film grain being digitally added be part of this? Why are we using vintage lenses? Because we have actually starved ourselves of something very, very human that we didn't know, which is tactile. And the digital tool, which we love, and it's great, it's so awesome, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we take a few trips around the sun, and it's like, I miss feeling things. And we didn't know we were missing that.
Tactile and specifically non-binary.
Non-binary. Tactile. You can't touch your digital footage. If your phone is full of photos, it doesn't weigh any more than when it's empty, right? So there's nothing tactile about that. And I think that attraction is going to find itself into the stories and the technology with which we use to tell them. And that's how I tend to predict where things are going. And I'm reasonably good at it, because I try to look at you guys and see what you're thinking, because my guess is if I know where you're thinking, I can maybe sell you something in a few years you might buy. So, that's kind of my trick.
Guess what? Mind you, that's a really illuminating way to look at things, but here's a strange thing. About 20 years ago, I was working in the pro audio business, and we were working with, to be honest, what were some rather poor digital to analog converters. But at the time, they were all we had. Now, they're getting a reputation as having a sort of mellow sound. I just find it incredibly ironic that a digital to analog converter, it has this kind of hipster attractiveness to people.
That's right. Doesn't surprise me.
Because back then they weren't ones and zeros. They were 0.999s and 0.0001s. Right. Yeah, they weren't quite exact, were they? Look, got a bit of time for some questions. Just while I'm just talking, think if you've got any questions to ask. I just want to mention that there's an incredible raffle going on for some Aperture prizes, beautiful prizes. What you have to do is put your business card in this jar. Not a very sophisticated process, so do have a go at it and see if you can manage that.
Should we pass it around?
Yeah, pass it.
Should we?
Yeah,
why
pass it
not?
around.
Yeah.
You want to take that?
And remember, put them in, don't take them out. So, anyone have any questions? You won't get an opportunity like this for a long time. Yeah.
Guys, fantastic panel. Thank you so much for having us. A lot of you guys said it was inspirational, but I really love what we were talking about how the story matters and then the marriage of tech and storytelling. That's really important. A couple of our members here, we're from the Long Beach Acting and Film Association, and we mentor young actors and filmmakers and do free events every single month. And we just did an event called Future in Showbiz that kind of covered some of the stuff you guys were saying, so this is fantastic. So some of our members are really interested in what's happening in the space of VR and then also drones. So if you guys could talk about some of your crystal ball feelings on that and how that marriage of VR and drone stuff is going into storytelling and filmmaking.
You know, those are two different things.
Yes, I'm trying to be a bad reporter and just get all the things.
I'm just teasing. I knew you
can
knew
actually
that.
monitor a drone with a VR headset.
You could wear a drone, I suppose. Yeah.
I'll give you some weird personal stuff as I'm also a study of industry trends and stuff like that. I just did a really interesting year-long study on human visual acuity of dynamic range and how far we should take HDR, which is weird. And one of the interesting things on that front is someone will come up to me sometimes and go, I think HDR is more important than resolution. And I go, why can't we have both? It's 2019, like flying cars, right? So in terms of VR, VR is wonderful for a lot of different applications. And it's immersive because it surrounds you with a world that you can exist in. But where VR struggles is it's not a casual viewing experience. And this is a big deal. Even Google has recently picked up on it by actually generating content that I think is only 180 degrees. If it was me, I probably would have said 220, 235. But because when you go home from work and you're done, for the day and you're just like wasted and tired of energy, not wasted necessarily, but you sit down on a couch and you don't want to turn around and look at the boogeyman who's chasing you. You want to all right, just tap me on the shoulder or something. You want it to be much more gentle on you. But VR is going to be a growth market, especially for gaming. I did some work with Oculus some time ago with the story department over there, and one of the fascinating things that we were discovering with VR was integrating cutting and how to make it not jarring to basically make people teleport in space or have you suddenly be in front of my face if I blink. And that's an interesting thing in itself. And I found orchestrating VR productions almost like a stage show, like a play, was way more powerful. And I do a lot of aerial cinematography, so I'll just drop a little thing on the drone. I don't use drones actually very much for what I do. I shoot with a helicopter mainly, but drones have obviously exploded in this industry. They are an incredibly powerful tool to get shots that are insane. Even before drones were popular, we were using gas-powered ones to do certain things that you just could not do. And this was before any of the safety requirements were there, so we just had rotors 2 feet from someone's head ready to chop off something. It's getting a little bit, as people are exploring it and stuff, there's just a lot of content. And also safety ramifications, I'll even drop that in there. But it's a developing world, and the drones are getting better. They're getting better at getting you shots that you want, which is way more powerful than where they were even 5 years ago. But to the trend. How many here know what NAB is? So much like lighting as well, when you go to NAB, you'll see industry trends develop. So when drones first hit the market in essentially a very affordable way, you started seeing more of them. And then there were 2 years at NAB where there was a crazy amount of drones. There was a drone park. There were people flying them all over. They were flying them indoors with nets and stuff like that. And the quality stuff tended to rise to the top. as well as some of the more easily to access stuff stayed around. And now when you went to NAB last year, what, 5 drone companies? Yeah. And the same things actually happened with LED lighting technology, where once LEDs got to a certain place in terms of quality, though they weren't all there, it exploded onto the market. And there's still a fair bit of lighting equipment, obviously, at NAB, because that's literally what we do for a living. But it's definitely died down because the good stuff is rising to the top in terms of what has good light output, price to performance ratio, quality of color, quality of white light, you name it. And now everything is RGB all the things, which is echoed in the computer world a little bit, which is fun.
Phil, I'm going to move on because we have got limited time.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Any more questions, anybody? Yeah.
One question I have is from a cinematography perspective, as the consumer consumption of cinematographic content has shifted from big screens to smallish screens and sort of standard dynamic range to high dynamic range and stuff. How has that shifted, or has it shifted your way of thinking about how you create the image in the first place?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, again, I'm just going to go back down to story and working with the director and collaborating. It's still this is a collaborative art. We still work with different players and to come together to create content. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I've actually done projects for Snapchat, and you have to shoot in the vertical format. Did it change the way that I prepared with the director? Absolutely not. We still shot listed. We still talked about story motivation or character motivation. It was just a different tool. So, I mean, if somebody says HDR versus SDR, my planning is not going to change. Because again, this industry is about relationships more so than it's about technology. The technology allows us to create things, but it's still all focused around relationships, so that will never change. At least that's my
Let me
feeling.
add something to Sandra, a different perspective on the same thing. So the question was, with all these transitions to smaller screens, phones, essentially away from theatrical projection, does that change the process or the way in which you tell the story? And Sandra's right, and in her perspective as the actual cinematographer, no, she doesn't really consider that as much when she's doing it because she's just going to do what the job requires. But let me explain something that's really, really important, because there are a lot of people that use the output format as a crutch. And I'll tell you what I'm told a lot, and this might sound familiar to you. Maybe you've said this, and you can change your mind starting now. And that is, it doesn't matter as much because it's only going to be seen on a smaller screen, and therefore it doesn't matter. Let me just explain one very, very, very important concept. When you shoot with a camera and you display the final result on a phone, everything that you shoot, everything you light, record, everything you do with sound, everything you do with the lens, everything you do with the performance and the acting, everything that is done with magnification and depth of field and field of view and flares and color and contrast and dynamic range, all of that translates down to the phone. The only thing that doesn't make it to the phone is resolution. That's the only thing. And for some reason, we argue, we let the resolution dominate everything and say because it doesn't have resolution, none of those other things are applicable. False. Totally false. Totally upside down, underwater, inside out. So remember, when you are making the argument that just because we're shooting something for the web, come on, right? People, right? Just because you're doing that, your need to maybe still shoot it on 65 millimeter film is just as valid and just as full of potential on a phone as it is. Mr. Christopher Nolan would disagree with me on that, but it's funny because I agree with everything that he stands for in hi-fi photography. There's actually an Instagram I follow, and someone actually posted a picture of North Fork on their Apple Watch and said, what would he say about this? And it's hysterical because that would make a point on sort of his edict. But we actually celebrate. What he's doing is trying to shoot for hi-fi, and he cares about hi-fi. That's to be celebrated, right? He's fighting that quality counts in all forms. Because I would say, well, that's the best looking Apple Watch video you're ever going to see is the one that was shot on 70 millimeter film, right? And it's true. That's why you can shoot on any of these hi-fi cameras, and aside from resolution, everything about North Fork is actually there on the on the watch, right? And that's why it's worth capturing on hi-fi all the time. Don't let it be a crutch.
Just to illustrate what you're saying, I was looking at some of Phil's footage. Again, it was that famous footage over New York, and I watched it on. I didn't have an 8K screen at home, but watched it on a 4K screen. Brilliant. I watched it on a like a HD screen.
Do you remember how many times you watched it?
Millions. Millions.
Thank you.
And then I watched it on my phone, which is a nice iPhone. And then I watched it on a really crappy phone. And it's retained that sort of sense of depth.
Still brilliant.
And dimensionality. A perfect practical example of what Michael was saying. So
I want to add one little pinch of salt to this. The quality and execution of storytelling across all mediums works. So you need to have that executed on a high level. The rules of color theory and composition as a frame, generally speaking, scale very well. So as long as you are doing your job effectively well, it works well. But I will be the pisser in the pot because I do like using larger format and I do like finishing out at larger resolutions. I really have enjoyed exploring things like micro-composition. I did a project, a narrative piece, where the gag in the movie is in frame the entire time before the reveal at the end. And the second time you walk back and watch it all over again, it's there. And it is there in every shot. It's mind-blowing. And for me, that was a personal goal. And honestly, that particular gag does not read well on a small screen. I am a little bit more Nolan. I would prefer more premiere viewing experiences than a small screen because I have a whole thing about optimal viewing distance and all that stuff.
I think we'd agree with you, but I mean, the modern reality
it
is
reads when it's smaller, and it's the quality of the execution, the quality of the story, and that's always going to be true. So in that way, it is Brave New World, and we have all these different worlds to finish out to. So.
Okay, yes, please.
So, I don't know if this is really a question, but what are your feelings on Soderbergh shooting with an iPhone, shooting that movie that was just released?
Yeah, so the question is Soderbergh shooting on an iPhone, what does that mean? And I think I know what Sandra would say. He told the story. Well, she's competing with her daughter now, so there's two cinematographers in the house, and her daughter's using an iPhone. So, that's going to happen. But the technology, I think the thing that matters is that quality counts, and what Soderbergh actually said was, I think what he's referring to is the process. He likes the iPhone as a tool because it's ininvasive, it's fast, it's simple, and it's getting his story told that way. He's actually made shooting on an iPhone okay for anyone to do now. So we have him to thank for that option. And I know there's a lot of people around the world that needed that validation, and that's great. But what I think is most exciting about is watch what happens to the phone world, because the concept, as we look at how optics technology is about to have a huge technological shift. There's a big thing coming to optics that's going to change everything, and that's going to change the size, weight, shape, and scale of optics, but maintain quality. And then there's a huge shift coming in phone technology. There's a huge shift coming in 5G satellite connectivity, and when you start pairing these things together, you're seeing something very, very, very new emerge. And Steven just happens to be the first early adopter of that, which is normal for him and a few other people like him. But he is the early adopter. So when someone sees the movie and says, that doesn't look as good as I want it to, they're forgetting this is alpha, right? So don't judge anything by alpha. That's a fool's errand, right? You're going to judge it 2, 4, 6, 8 years.
All right, so brilliant answers. I mean, I could do this for 3 hours or 6 hours. We really have run out of time. I just want to leave you with a thought, which is to explain the era we're living in and why we should be so excited about it. I've come up with a very simple phrase, just a few syllables. It's stochastic hyper-exponentiality.
Say it again.
Stochastic hyper-exponentiality.
Can you just define simple phrase as well?
Yeah, but explaining that is very simple. Listen, stochastic is just a term that economists use to explain the randomness. Whenever you look at the stock market or something, it's always a bit random, isn't it? Smooth it out and you get the true shape. Exponential. Most of us know that Moore's law is kind of exponential. Moore's law is just an observation. It doesn't make things happen. But nevertheless, there is a tendency, not just semiconductors, but all kinds of things, storage, memory, bandwidth, to follow this exponential curve where it doubles. Look at the iPhone. If it's 1,000 times in 12 years, in another 12 years, it's going to be 1 million times. How do we cope with a million-fold? But that's not it. Beyond that, when you have several things moving exponentially, you don't add them together, you multiply them. So you add up, so where your exponential curve was doing that, it's now doing that. And from our perspective, it's almost vertical. Now, add the stochastic part of that in, the randomness. Where's that coming from? It's coming from things like AI. So just before, I think it was August this year, ask anybody when we'd be able to do ray tracing in real time. They'd say, it's another 10 years. And they've been saying it's another 10 years for at least the last 15 years. All of a sudden, NVIDIA brought out their Turing architecture, which could do ray tracing in real time. So in addition to this incredibly steep curve, where just for a few minutes on the time axis, you move forward just like an incomprehensible amount. It's getting to be like understanding the scale of the universe. We can't envisage it. So we are losing the ability to predict what is going to happen. It gets very exciting with trade shows because you get big trade shows every 6 months or so, and you have virtually no idea what's going to crop up. You're going to find that increasingly. So those are the times we're in, and you can either fear it or you can be excited about it. But just my tip would be, if you want to be excited about it, keep your eyes on the trends. And do your own wild thinking about it, and be flexible, and be agile, willing to adapt, flexibility and adaptability. And if you have those in mind, you keep your eye on the trend. If you run a business, if you're in business, if you want to keep ahead of everybody else, follow those trends, look to where the ball is going, not to where it was kicked. And you'll be able to enjoy this amazing era that we're in. Because think about it, when all of you were like 5 years old, somebody had explained to you that everything in technology is going to be like 1,000 times better in a few years, and then in a few more years it'll be like 1 million. You think, no, based on my intuition, that's not going to happen. But it actually is happening. It's indisputable. There's an unbelievable amount of evidence that this is happening. Look at resolutions, 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. I think 8K is something like 85 times the resolution of standard definition. So be excited about this. We certainly are. And that's it, everybody. Thanks ever so much for listening. Thanks to the panel. Oh.